from the Cube studios in Palo Alto and Boston, bringing you data-driven insights from the Cube and ETR. This is Breaking Analysis with Dave Vellante.
Cybersecurity is the number one risk facing enterprises today, and yet organizations remain dangerously unprepared. Executives, they're not blind to the problem. They understand the financial exposure and the reputational stakes and the business impact of a major breach. As well, they acknowledge gaps in their defenses and they recognize the vulnerabilities that could cripple their mission-critical systems. But awareness has not translated into readiness, and true business resilience remains elusive for the vast majority of firms that we have surveyed and we talked to. Data strategies are especially important, specifically data governance, data protection, and data quality. These remain essential elements of cyber resilience, but they are only part of the equation. True business resilience requires confronting a multitude of dimensions, from application security, identity, supply chain integrity, operational continuity, infrastructure defenses, and more. Now, the uncomfortable truth is that most firms still lack the cohesive strategy, the investment, and the execution to protect their most vital assets. In this breaking analysis, Cube Research principal analyst Christophe Bertrand and I share fresh data from a recent survey that quantifies this reality. We're going to unpack what it means for technology buyers who must navigate escalating risks, for the vendors that are seeking to align their solutions to market demand, and for industries where data is not just a byproduct, but the lifeblood of competitive advantage. Christophe Bertrand, welcome, and thanks for taking some time for Breaking Analysis.
Thank you for having me on, Dave.
You bet. Okay, in addition to a little bit of ETR spending data on key pure play data protection companies, most of the conclusions that we're going to draw today come from a study that was spearheaded by Christophe as part of his Cyber Resiliency Summit, which was a huge success. But before we get into that survey data, we wanted to share a brief clip from the Acquired podcast. Now, recently they hosted Jamie Dimon and asked him what worries him most and what are the risks that keep him up at night. And Dimon mentioned a number of risk factors in banking. He talked about asset prices being inflated, but listen to what he said about the number one risk. Please play the clip.
And then the other thing, and the biggest risk to me is cyber. I mean, I think this cyber stuff is, we're very good at it. We work with all the government agencies. They would say that Jamie was up, we spend $800 million a year or something on it. We educate people on it. We just do. But you're talking about grids and communications companies. And
all right, so there you have it, Christophe. So just how prepared are organizations? Where are the challenges? And what does best practice look like? Your survey set out to quantify these and some other items. So here we're showing the objectives and the attributes of the survey. Christophe, can you briefly walk us through what were you trying to achieve here?
Absolutely, Dave. So, as part of our Cyber Resiliency Summit, one of the components that we cared about was to also bring together and bring to the market and to our partners and sponsors some fresh data on what's going on. So we completed a survey of about 600 respondents around the world, including APAC and Europe, North America, obviously. And what we did was very interesting. We also looked at both IT and cyber type of populations, AB, if you will, type of testing. And we got a lot of interesting results. It allowed us to really gain insight into what's going on, what is cyber resilience, what is going on in this market, what our end users like you watching us telling us is going on in your environment. And with 600 respondents, I can assure you we're getting a very, very good read of what's going on. And we followed the NIST model. To your point, it's not just one specific aspect, it's a bunch of different components. And NIST is a commonly accepted language, which is something our survey also showed.
Yeah, and we don't have time to go into all that today, but I thought one of the most interesting aspects of the study was the juxtaposition of the IT and the security operations. It was very interesting to see the influence that security and the security teams really are having over the entire decision process. So let's take a look, if we can, at the cost of disruption. When we look at the data, it's pretty sobering. Nearly 2/3 of organizations in this survey reported being hit with a cyber attack that had a negative financial or operational impact in just the last 12 months. and many experienced multiple events. So the consequences, as we're saying here, go well beyond just the stolen data. We're talking about operational disruptions, financial losses, of course, reputational hits, governance failures. They're all part of the fallout. We're not trying to scare you, but this is scary stuff. And this tells us that cybersecurity isn't just an IT problem. It's a business resilience challenge with many, many dimensions. So it's not trivial to address this. Christophe, maybe you can unpack these findings and what they really mean for enterprises and take us through this data.
Yes. So first of all, as you can see on the chart, the interesting thing to note is the top two, and this was, pick all that apply and as far as the answers go. So pick your poison. It's a popularity contest type of question, as I like to call them. So what you can see, the top two are actually business related. They're operational in nature, financial loss, operational exposures or downtime and disruption. Those are big problems that go straight to both the top line and the bottom line. The other point is the fact that there are so many ways to have your data exposed or lost, whether it's exposed, leaked, actually encrypted. And ransomware was unfortunately just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other ways that your data can be affected. And that's really the bloodline, the actual assets today in most organizations are not necessarily physical, especially in the case of what we just heard in the banking industry. It's really all about data. And then, of course, data governance and compliance. Those are very big problems. So what I'm saying is this. There's really a convergence in the infrastructure market between backup recovery, cybersecurity, and what I would call data compliance and governance. And this is getting amplified by also the need, to your earlier point, of providing data to feed the business, and maybe we'll talk about how that implies also what you can do with AI.
Yeah, thank you, Christophe. In my many years as an analyst and covering cybersecurity in the space, something's very clear, and I think of it in very simple terms. The adversaries think about the numerator and the denominator. The numerator being the benefit. What benefit am I going to get in the denominator being the cost? And to the extent that you can increase as a defender that denominator, they're going to go elsewhere. And so I want to talk about the weakest link. And what really jumps out in this data is that no part of the infrastructure is immune. If there is a weak link, they will find it. Even the very systems that are designed for protecting the data, the backup and recovery, they are the most frequently targeted, as you can see here, from cloud data, storage, IoT, network, SaaS, and even AI workloads themselves have been creeping up in these surveys. So attackers, they're hitting every layer looking for that weakest link, and when they find it, they're going to exploit it. So this really, Christophe, underscores the reality that cyber isn't isolated in one domain. It's pervasive across the entire stack. So why don't you take it from here and let's dig into what this all means.
Right, and that's why cyber resiliency, really, it's a combination of multiple factors. So first things first, you look at this, you realize that the first thing, or the first part of the infrastructure, a cyber attacker is going to go after, maybe using some AI-powered attack, by the way, is going to be your backups. So if there's one thing you have to protect, it's really the protector, the backups. And there are multiple technologies and many, many vendors who can help in this process. But the point being is that this is what they're going to go after, because once your backups are gone, then you're really exposed. There's no way back. And of course, that changes definitely the numerator, as you were indicating, and the possibility of getting a pretty big ransom. The other point is cloud. The second one on the list, very high on the list, again, this was a popularity contest type of question, is cloud-based type of infrastructure in hyperscalers. And cloud security, and in general, access, security, et cetera, has always been a problem. It keeps being a problem here and a concern. Now, lots of great technologies exist. I'm not blaming anybody here. It's a very difficult thing to do, to protect all of your cloud environments. But the truth is, you really need to think about that. That's number 2 on the list. And then overall, you look at this and you realize, well, any part of this house could be attacked. So you really have to think about 2 things. Number 1 is, do you have a good understanding of every component? And is every component secure? Number 2, actually, it's a system. And I really question whether we have today in the market enough interoperability across all of these layers and all of these components of the infrastructure. And I think that's going to be the game moving forward. The ecosystem, the APIs, and this is also starting to drive some significant M&A type of activity, because nobody can do it all. And of course, the more you do, the more you're likely to be chosen in the enterprise as the vendor of choice.
Right. And I feel like a lot of the themes that we're talking about today, everyone talks about, but it's always nice to put data behind it. And one of the things that we hear often is that SecOps and IT teams, they're drowning in incident volumes, whether it's false positives, high velocity AI attacks are now, increasingly a thing, you name it. And one of the most troubling findings in the data is how many incidents are simply ignored because people are just overwhelmed. I mean, nearly half of the organizations admit that they dismiss between a quarter and half of all alerts. Again, not because they don't matter, but it's just impractical to chase them all down. That's just a huge exposure that's hiding in plain sight, Christophe. Help us understand your thoughts on this and what the implications are.
So there are a few things, and by the way, we did additional research also on what happens after an incident, and do you actually do forensics and perform some forensic analysis, and a lot of people do not. So two things. Number one, you're ignoring a bunch of incidents, and the truth is you don't really know necessarily that those are good, bad, or indifferent. Lots of things can happen. So the only good answer is you have to really track everything, unfortunately. And I know it's very, very hard. This is the one part. This is where, Jamie Dimon was saying, it's hard, it's difficult. And it is. But that's a reality. It's a volume game. The other thing you have to think about is this is where AI as a friend can now become helpful. There are great technologies out there, a number of vendors who are now leveraging AI to decouple your capabilities in at least understanding what incidents happen, quick analysis, quick classification, prioritization, etc. There are also services, companies, organizations that can help you do that. So the more incidents you ignore, the more likely you are to have a problem. There's no question about it. The state of the market is not good. It needs to be addressed. Good news is it's doable. There are technologies and partners who can help you do that.
One of the things, Christophe, that really struck me was the exposure specifically for mission critical data and apps. They are not fully protected. And this chart really drives that home. I mean, a startling percentage of organizations can't say with confidence that even half of their mission critical apps and data are fully protected, with uncompromised data copies that they can restore. So that means if the worst happens, a lot of businesses might not be able to get back on their feet quickly. And you've got additional data. We don't, again, have time to show you everything but a RPO and RTO. But Christophe, walk us through this data and what it really means.
So look, if it's mission critical, it is mission critical. Okay, so the only good answer would be that I want to be in a position as an organization to always be able to recover my mission critical systems and data. And by the way, it's not just one system. It's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, a number of intertwined and interlinked components of the infrastructure, databases, files, structured, semi-structured, you name it, cloud, on-prem. Net is, if it's mission critical, it has to be recoverable in a way that is not altered from a data standpoint. The reason you need to do this is very obvious. It's obviously the operational consequences to your business. This is top line, bottom line type of stuff right there. Number two, even if you don't think the business is that important, you're going to get a problem with compliance for sure if you start losing data or have issues demonstrating what you've actually done with the data because it's lost. So you have really a multiple sort of compounding effect here when your mission critical applications are not recoverable, and clearly the state of the market shows us how bad the situation is. I consider it really bad. You should not have anything that's not recoverable. Now I know it sounds a bit absolute, and it's easy to say. I don't want to be sort of be the armchair sort of coach here, but this is the reality. This is what you, as the end users, are telling us is going on, and the consequences are really, really critical to the business. So, as I would say, the only position to be in is as close as possible to 100% of recoverability. And again, good news, there are great technologies that can allow you to do that. It's just difficult to align the people, the processes, and technology to get it done.
Well, that gets me to the next point here, which again was somewhat surprising to me. I assume that, okay, if you get attacked and you've got your defenses in place, that you're going to be able to recover the vast majority, if not all, of your data, but that's not the case. Cyber attacks almost certainly mean you're going to lose data, not just a little bit of data. So this view really highlights the stakes. On the left-hand side, you see how much data organizations say was actually impacted in an attack. So for many, you're talking 20 to 40% of their data was hit. And on the right, you can see the recovery rates. Now, the good news is most firms got at least half of their data, but only about 1 in 10 achieved full recovery. So that, to me, Christophe, was a sobering gap between loss and true resilience. What does this tell you, and what's your takeaway here?
A couple of things. First of all, as you can see, everything's connected. Your mission critical applications are not recoverable. Of course, you're going to be losing data, because if they're not recoverable, what are you going to do, right? You don't have the data, you don't have the parts of the data that are critical. You've lost data coherence, data integrity. There are so many twists and turns here. I think the real conversation is, why is this happening? And it is happening clearly because not enough protection and recoverability capabilities are in place. I know it sounds ridiculous after all these years of investing in backup and recovery, but it's true. It's because there's so much data, number one. There are lots of people, lots of processes. And then the other thing is also the fact that attackers are smart, and they're smarter every day, and they use AI. So they're going to find new ways to lose data. So can you get to zero data loss? I think it's going to be very, very hard, but at a minimum, you should be in a position to recover most of your data and then have the ability to recreate what you've lost pretty quickly. And it's very, very doable. There are lots of great technologies out there, again, between high availability, leveraging combination of on-prem, in the cloud, tape, very important as well in many cases. It is doable. It is just hard. And I think what you're seeing, again, from this global research that we just conducted, there is a lot of work ahead. So on the vendor side, I think it highlights or outlines the opportunity that still exists. And it also shows you that the evolution of traditional backup and recovery is now really becoming one of becoming the cyber resiliency critical component for success long term. So it's a great opportunity for changes in the market.
Yeah, Christophe, you and I have been working on this topic for well over a decade, actually many decades, and we know there really is no such thing as zero data loss, but you want to get your RPO as tight as possible, especially for your mission critical applications. And we just saw that a lot of organizations are losing 20 to 40% of their data in an attack, and only a fraction ever get back to full recovery. But these percentages, they only tell part of the story. So what does this really mean in terms of actual time and transaction loss? That's something that Christophe's study went into. So this next chart puts all that into perspective. For nearly a third of companies, an attack wiped out between 1 and 5 hours of data. So now we're getting into sort of how much data are you going to lose, the sort of RPO, recovery point objective. Another 20% lost 6 to 10 hours, and some reported losing an entire day or more. So think about the productivity hit. So it's not just an IT issue. That's lost revenue. It's disrupted operations. It's a productivity killer, and it's shaken customer trust. So Christophe, help us break down, what you see here, and what does this mean for organizations?
Yeah, it's a pretty grim picture. What it means is that, first of all, hopefully you know what you've lost. If you've identified what you've lost, it's a starting point. But can you imagine if you're an enterprise and you lose an hour of transactions? Because this was really how we formulated the question here in terms of the answers that were provided. Well, a lot can happen in 1 hour in a large enterprise that generates, thousands of transactions potentially. So that's really the name of the game. It's the business being affected. But the other dimension is that lost data comes with a price tag that's not just operational, or lost revenue, it's also compliance related. And you, in many cases, cannot afford to actually, lose data at all. And, and you want to get it back as quickly as you can for all sorts of operational reasons. So if you look at the research, only a couple of percent could be back on their feet in a matter of seconds. And, with cyber attacks, it's kind of complicated because you need to figure out what's actually good, what's not good. So the time to recover could be a bit extended. But how much you've lost is really what you must protect for the business and minimize as much as you can. So again, lots of work ahead, but a great opportunity for high availability type of technologies. And again, more AI to help you build better RPO and RTO profiles and plans and programs.
Okay, great. So this next data set makes it pretty clear that recovery is anything but quick, to your point. So on the left-hand side here, when we asked customers hypothetically how long it would take to bounce back from a ransomware attack, most organizations said between a week and 2 weeks. Ugh. And on the right-hand side, when we asked what actually happened, so these are individuals who actually experienced the attack, the results, they were very close, nearly identical. So the reality matched the expectation, and it wasn't good. Recovery from cyber incidents still stretches into days and weeks for the majority of firms. So Christophe, put this into context. If recovery from a cyber event takes 1 to 2 weeks for most companies, what does that tell us about the resilience posture of organizations broadly and industries?
Well, I think there's a lot more that meets the eye. First of all, the two questions or the two charts, if you look at the bottom of the charts, our viewers will see that how we formulate the questions and the number of respondents. What's interesting was the would versus the did. And I was betting you would get different answers. And in reality, you're right, the same general distribution. Here's why, in my opinion. It's because people know. They know that what happened, the fact that it took them days last time is likely not fixed. And if it happened again, it would probably be very similar. So that's one of my interpretations of this. And we asked this question also to figure that out, all right? The other point is, if it takes days for full resolution, what are you doing during those days? You're not investing into your IT, you're not investing into new applications or new infrastructure. So you're actually disrupting the business, you're disrupting your productivity, you're disrupting the investment you've made in IT because you're scrambling to get things back on track. And that's why the risks are so high, and the rewards, in a sense, they're counter negative. They're a positive reward that's countering a negative. Oh, well, you won't be down for days. I mean, okay, that's kind of a hard sell. Turns out, much less so now. Why? We're not showing this here, but our research also shows that as far as key decision makers, when it comes to cyber resiliency, you're going to find CISOs, you're going to find CIOs, and of course, security teams, and you're going to find executives coming up on the funding side of the decision. So a great time for you as an end user watching us to go have a chat with executives about expectations and reality. And for vendors, I think it's an opportunity to educate the market as to what they can provide to help change this picture, which is really not good at all.
Christophe, just a quick aside. Again, I've said many times, we just don't have time to go through all the data, but one of the other findings in the study, and you have data on this, is that when you pay the ransom, you don't get your data back. You might get some of it back, but the vast majority of companies only got a portion of their data back, and that was striking to me. So it just doesn't make sense to pay the ransom. You're much better off investing in the people, processes, and technologies so that if and when you get hit with a ransom attack, you're able to defend and recover. Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bad idea to think that's going to be your only strategy. You need to be able to recover on your own devices, literally. No pun intended, but that's the idea. And also it begs the question of, cyber insurance.
Yeah.
Of course, is it necessary? Should it be something you do, you don't do? If they tell you, well, just pay the ransom, what is it really going to change if indeed only a few percentage points, I think it was 1 in 10 or something, could actually recover 100% of their data? It's just not a good option. So And it also increases your costs because guess what? Those premiums are going up. Now, the positive is now to get cyber insurance, those companies, in order to minimize their payout and their risks, what do? They actually ask you to go audit and inspect your infrastructure and make sure you have the right processes and people and technologies in place. So there's a positive to that, which we did not really explore, but I know it certainly is out there. Again, it goes back to building cyber resiliency in every component at the data level, at the infrastructure level, and at the people level.
Great, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the cloud. When the cloud became the dominant operating model, it became also the first line of defense. And I think initially a lot of customers felt like, wow, my data's in the cloud, whether it's Amazon or Google, they're better at security than I am, so I'm good. The reality is there's a shared responsibility model, and they're great, those hyperscalers, at protecting, the physical infrastructure and doing what they need to do on their side of the ledger. But in terms of your data and your applications, you have a great deal of responsibility associated with protecting. So that shared responsibility model in the early days of cloud was not well understood. It's increasingly understood now, and it has become that first line of defense. What's striking here is that cloud and AI-driven threats now top the list of concerns. So there's still some education and process improvements that need to be done around cloud. And of course, AI, Gen AI at least, is, new, relatively new, and it's bringing new threats. So even ahead of traditional risks like ransomware, encryption, or data exfiltration, we see cloud and AI-driven threats. And right behind them, we see compliance exposure. That cracks the top 5, which says a lot about how regulatory pressure and public policy is shaping the security agenda. So, Christophe, give us some color on what's driving these shifts. And if AI and cloud are really the biggest concerns, does that mean we're underestimating how disruptive they will be comparative to traditional threats?
Well, I mean, the biggest question is, what is a traditional threat? Do we know what it is anymore? It's and clearly, that could be the topic of a whole survey, Dave. I think what it shows, though, is yes. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of concern around cloud, and you brought up an interesting point. Remember, your data is always your responsibility as an end user. It doesn't matter where it lives. If you think there are magical people in the cloud or in your SaaS applications doing your backups for you, you need to really think again. It's your responsibility. That's why you need to back up your SaaS environments, back up your hyperscaler environments, private cloud, doesn't matter. It's your data. You protect it, you back it up, you archive it, you make it compliant. And you need to do that. You know why? Because there's this new concept of AI, and people want to be able to do AI. To do AI, they need data. Of course, they need a lot of other things, but they need good data. They need cyber resilient and compliant data. And unless you have that, you can't do AI at any scale. As a matter of fact, that's probably why we're seeing so many issues with ROI on initiatives. Now, the second one was an interesting one. Are people worried about AI as a foe? Yes. So that's the ambivalence about AI. It's both a friend and a foe. I expect that you will see successful organizations and successful vendors leverage AI in the process of data protection, probably through, again, ecosystem plays, better capabilities, automated capabilities, maybe some Gen AI capabilities in their solutions, because you have to, in a sense, fight fire with fire in this case. The fact that these two are the top concerns, I think, gives you a pretty good sense of how things have evolved. Now we are questioning our infrastructure. We are questioning the resilience of our infrastructure, and the enemy keeps becoming smarter and more automated. So it is really a good time to rethink priorities. I wouldn't be shocked if moving forward we saw a new breed of executive come to the forefront in the CEO type of positions, people who actually have more of a technology background than maybe ever before compared to the traditional sales or financial backgrounds. I expect that's what's going to happen in very traditional businesses because of these trends.
And, this study really underscores the nature of cyber. It's always a game of cat and mouse. It's not a static environment. The government oftentimes admonishes companies, you got to do better. It is, and a lot of finger wagging. The reality is it's very difficult. So the real point of a survey like this is we're trying to help organizations really understand how things are changing, where these exposures are, what the best practice looks like, what peers are doing, at that advanced level, so that you can, Wayne Gretzky skate to the puck, as opposed to try to, closing the barn door after the horse leaves. Sorry for all the analogies. But let's look at some of the spending data. This ETR view, our friends at ETR, shows how these are pure play data protection players. So for instance, Dell is not on here because the ETR taxonomy the category is storage. Okay, well, Dell's got a lot of different storage besides just data protection, but so we just chose the pure plays here. So we're looking at how they stack up in terms of net score, which is a measure of spending momentum, spending velocity, and then overlap on the x-axis. That's penetration into the data set. It's a proxy for market share, if you will. It's not actual market share, but it's market share, if you will, or mentioned share within the survey. And this is account-based. This is not spending-based. So it's the penetration into accounts. That dotted red line at 40% indicates a highly elevated net score. So Rubrik and Veeam, they remain strong. And you can see Cohesity, the classic Cohesity, prior to the acquisition of Veritas. We see where they're positioned. Druva, a little lower on the y-axis. And then Commvault, a bit further back in the peer set. Commvault is a little bit of a concern to me. It's dropped nearly 20 percentage points on the vertical axis in just 1 year. So we're going to have to dig into that. But what's really interesting here, what stood out was Veritas. Veritas post-acquisition. Look at it pre and look at it post. So we go back to last April. It just is just amazing. The leap that has pulled off, a huge rebound from laggard to leader this quarter. And granted, the ends are smaller. There's 45 ends, but that's a meaningful jump. And I texted with Sanjay Poonen this morning. He's the CEO of Cohesity, and he led the Veritas deal. And he told me that Cohesity, they're gaining share rapidly, especially, he said, in the enterprise. And he said the very largest companies in the world, they're leaning into Cohesity specifically to shore up their cyber resilience with a focus on data, as we've been talking about, Christophe. We're talking about data a lot here. He said it's across the board, and they're focusing on 10 industries, including banking, public sector, technology, retail, manufacturing, healthcare, and some others. And those are where they're winning. And he said those 10 verticals are where they're the strongest, and that's where they're focused now. So seems like many acquisitions fail to meet objectives. But I think what's happened there is they've stopped the bleeding. If you look at the earlier ETR data, what you saw with Veritas was a lot of defections, a lot of deplatforming, and that really hurts your net score. But Christophe, what do you make of all this? Veeam is always well positioned on the x-axis because, again, this is an account-based penetration survey. Rubrik's, I gotta hand it to Bipul, his decision to pivot hard towards cyber. I was skeptical at the time, but it was clearly the right move. In retrospect, everybody is following that. Take us through the horses on the track from your perspective, Christophe.
Right. So a little bit of a grain of salt on this. Obviously, I want to, cover the most important one, which is Veritas going up. I mean, yes, the fact after the acquisition, clearly, I think there was evidence that it was a big risk of losing clients. I mean, all of a sudden, you're giving them a reason to go see somewhere else. Now, remember, if you look in the enterprise space specifically, most enterprises have multiple backup and recovery vendors. Now, there may be one that's a little more prominent, and everybody's going to fight for share of wallet. But through history, acquisitions, et cetera, large organizations have picked up different layers of technologies and different constructs and different solutions. And so you're going to have a lot of accounts in common, even if you're a direct competitor. That's number one. Number two, if you were to account for Fortune 500 versus including all the mid-market, you would probably see a different picture in terms of the lineup. I think Veeam is still very much in the mid-market, definitely present in a number of enterprise accounts, and a lot of them being maybe more like a decentralized enterprise, and certainly doing really well, marketing machine, very efficient company from that standpoint. But if you were to look in the enterprise, I think the picture would be a bit different. Now, Rubrik has been very successful. Clearly, where they're at now is a testament to that. because you say you're a cybersecurity company doesn't make you a cybersecurity company. I still believe there's a bit of an over pivot there. But, the market is responding. I think at the end of the day, we'll see how this plays out. Commvault, I think, may need to grow in size. I think that's one of these things. You look at Cohesity and Veritas, we're getting closer to 2 billion. You kind of want to be closer to 2 billion in this market now, 1.5 to 2 versus 1. I think that's going to be a size effect. And I will predict this. Some of these vendors will consolidate or be absorbed by other technology vendors in this sort of triangle of technologies I've identified between data management, compliance, cyber, and other cyber resiliency data protection vendors. I think there's going to be some further consolidation of the market. And again, that's because the solutions that are needed from a technology standpoint are much broader than any of these individual vendors can provide, even if what they're providing is absolutely critical. I'm not arguing that. And then finally, I think we'll have to see who does better with AI as a friend. To me, the biggest differentiator moving forward will be how, as an organization, as a vendor, pick any name here, how do you implement AI in the process of cyber resiliency, cyber recovery, data protection, you name it? And how do you make it really your friend to optimize the ability of these enterprises to better respond, better defend, better recover? That's actually an area that I'm in the process of studying right now. And we'll probably have some interesting surprises and more data to share in the next few months on this topic.
Great. But before we summarize, I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about how to get access to you and this information. You've done a tremendous job here. How do people get more information? Just email you, Christophe@siliconangle.com.
Exactly. Just get in touch. Check out the website. Connect with us. More than happy to have a chat. Find me on LinkedIn. Lots of options. I'm easy to find.
Okay. All right. Let's wrap up. Wrapping up. We've covered a lot of ground here, but it really boils down to some hard truths. Frankly, of cyber resiliency isn't just a technology issue; it's a business challenge. Most organizations just are kind of really exposed, and these weak links that we talked about, they exist across the entire stack. There's no part of the infrastructure that's safe. The vendor landscape is shifting. We're seeing a convergence. Christophe, I'd love for you to talk about that between backup, recovery, security, governance. It's all kind of coming together. That security marketplace is just getting more and more crowded, and the TAM continues to grow, as does complexity. And here's the kicker. There is no AI without cyber resilient data. Christophe, I know you've been very clear on this point, as you just mentioned, the AI piece. Walk us through what these takeaways mean in practice, please.
Yeah, so in practice, and I'm just going to focus on the last point because, okay, you want to do AI, that's great. You have to get a lot of components, get it right. That's all good. But before you can do that, you need data that you can trust. In order to trust your data, you have to make sure it's cyber resilient and compliant. You cannot just use data, and it doesn't matter whether it's Gen AI or some sort of big data type of model, what we used to call big data. Now we can call it something else with AI in it. But the net is the data has to meet a number of requirements. And in order to do that, you need for it to be cyber resilient, because if it's not, by definition, it won't be compliant. You won't be able to understand how to protect it correctly, defend it correctly, how to use it correctly from a compliance standpoint. There's a lot of personal data or personal identifiers you certainly don't want to start throwing into a lot of these models. So that's the starting point. And when you think about where we're at with this research, what we just showed you, and how exposed you are on your mission critical apps, how your data that you should be able to reuse internally for a lot of your AI efforts. Well, that data is not even compliant or resilient. It's going to be hard. So we'll keep exploring this idea of compliance and governance in the age of AI. That's an area that we care about a lot. Here on the analyst side of the Cube at the Cube Research. And I believe that there are many years of work just on cyber resilience. So it's a great space to be in. It's a great space as a professional, as an end user to focus on. It is changing. The job of traditional security versus traditional IT. I think that it's all starting to combine. The teams are getting together to really take a close look at the overall problem and fix the issues. And I expect that it's going to be a very, very dynamic market on the vendor side. I expect to see a lot of interesting moves. There's a lot of work to do, a lot of API work to do, a lot of partnerships, a lot of ecosystem work to do. And I would say, as you think as an end user about evaluating vendors in the space of cyber resiliency, leverage NIST as a guide, a good way to understand where they fit in the NIST model, how you have exposures in your own NIST model, and application and deployment, and ask vendors about their ecosystem and their use of AI to support you. Those are the things I would recommend people do as we think about these findings. And really, you're right, very hard truths here.
Christophe, excellent work. You're right. I mean, if you like a challenge, get into cybersecurity. It's harder than golf, and perfection is elusive. But you can add some real value to the industry. It's a great field. Wonderful working with you, Christophe. Really fantastic job. So thank you for this survey work, your insights, and spending some time on breaking analysis.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'll be back with more research in the future.
Awesome. All right, let's wrap it. Thanks to Alex Myerson and Ken Schiffman on production, and Alex manages our podcast as well. Kristen Martin and Cheryl Knight help get the word out on social media and in our newsletters, and Rob Hof is our editor-in-chief over at siliconangle.com. All these episodes, they're available as podcasts, as we say, wherever you listen. All you got to do is search Breaking Analysis Podcast. I publish each week on thecuberesearch.com and siliconangle.com, or you can email me if you want to get in touch, david.vellante@siliconangle.com. You can DM me at dvellante or comment on our LinkedIn post, and check out etr.ai. They've got the best survey data in the enterprise tech business. This is Dave Vellante for Christophe Bertrand and the Cube Research Insights powered by ETR. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Breaking Analysis.